When I first switched to Sony mirrorless just under 2 years ago, I had to make a very, very careful decision about what lenses I was going to get. I ended up going with the 24 to 70 2.8 and the 85 millimeter f1.8. But eventually I did start to miss having a faster, somewhat wide angle prime. In an ideal world, I would have loved to have the 35 millimeter 1.4, but that just was not in the budget. They didn't have anything for full frame cameras except the closest thing was the 28 millimeter f2, I believe. Yeah, 28 millimeter f2, which is great, but it's no 35. So I had to wait and wait and wait for a 35 millimeter 1.8 option, full frame, to be released. And finally, last year, they gave it to us. And overall, I would say it was worth the wait. I've now spent almost about 5 months with it, and I can say with confidence that I have a pretty good understanding of this lens and the pros and cons. So I'm going to be breaking those down into the highlights and the lowlights of this lens. The highlights are definitely the size of the lens and how lightweight it is. It just is so easy to throw on my A7 III, put it in a small bag or a camera bag, and just go about my everyday carry. Next up in highlights, I would say, is the autofocus. Now, the autofocus in my A7 III just in general isn't as good as my Nikon cameras because I think it's just the way that the mirrorless system works. Everything's fine in normal lighting, but in low light, it particularly kind of struggles a little bit and hunts a little bit more. And this lens is no exception to that. It's just, I think, the nature of the beast. It's just how mirrorless cameras and the technology for those work. All that said, the 35 millimeter is punchy. It's quite fast, like in normal lighting situations, and it's very accurate. I haven't had very many misfires or misfocuses. Occasionally, maybe in some lighting situations, particularly if it's backlit, or like I said, in low light, it'll do that. But generally speaking, I think it's a great autofocus system in this lens. Next, we have to discuss sharpness and bokeh, even though these are pretty subjective things. I think sharpness, it really depends on how much of a pixel peeper you are. I never really zoom in on stuff like that. I'm not printing these super large, and for my style of work, it tends to be a little soft focus or a little raw kind of like emotion, or like on the fly candids in general, which in my opinion, I think having like the sharpest image all the time doesn't always necessarily lend to the emotion of the photo. So I'm not super big on sharpness. I am pretty big on bokeh, but I have to say with this lens, it's not anything particularly unique. It just has a nice softness to it. And that's great. Nothing super distracting. It softens the background very pleasantly. Just nothing super unique like I've seen with maybe some other lenses. Overall, though, my favorite highlight of this lens is just the versatility of it. Now, a lot of this is just coming from the fact that it's a 35 millimeter, and I absolutely love that focal length for portraits, environmental portraits, and street photography, and just kind of going out and getting some really nice images whenever I'm out with my husband at a restaurant or something. But generally speaking, this lens in particular, because of the size and the weight, lend to that versatility. Because of the 1.8 aperture, would I rather it be 1.4? Yes, but for the money, the 1.8 is just fine for most lighting situations, and I am a huge fan. This lens, since I received it like late August, early September of last year, has been on my camera 80% of the time for a reason. The only time I've taken it off is if I've needed to get really, really close and tight with a telephoto style shot and I've switched to my 85, or if I was in a really difficult situation and needed like the zoom versatility of the 24 to 70. But all that being said, there are some, we'll call them low lights for this lens. One of which is the build quality. It's not bad by any means. It's just not what I would expect from a lens of this price tier. The $750 price tag it has on it is another low light of mine. I think that if it were closer to like a $500 mark, like the 85 millimeter was, then I could totally just be fine with this build quality. But when it's off the camera and it's like not engaged, like not on the camera, like the camera's not turned on with the lens on, there's this weird like shaking that happens within the lens, and I'm told it's normal and it's part of just like the autofocus mechanism that's built into it, but it's a little weird. Everything else is fine, but that's a little weird to me. Overall, the build quality is okay, just maybe not what I would expect from a lens this expensive. The big picture here is that it's a great lens, even for the higher price tag. It's a wonderful lens. Like I said, it's been on my camera 80% of the time since I've got it. Do I wish that it was maybe a 1.4? Yes. Can I afford that? No. Are there any other options for full frame cameras? No. So if you want a 35mm and you don't want to stray outside of the Sony ecosystem to get a third-party lens, which can have some autofocus and compatibility kind of streamline issues there, then this is it. This is your option, but you can take comfort in knowing that it is a good option, and that it is worth the price at the end of the day, even if it is maybe more than I would like to pay. I still paid it. I didn't return it because the value that it gives is equal to that price. At the end of the day, that's what matters. So there it is. That's my review of the 35mm FE 1.8 for Sony mirrorless full frame cameras. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, if you need any kind of help deciding what to get, if this lens is right for you, feel free to leave a comment below. I'm more than happy to help. And if you found this video helpful at all, please give it a like. Thank you.